Chapter 1. Jean Valjean. Forward. It is the year 1796, and the people of France are hungry. Not the rich people, of course. They have food. They have warm clothes. They have beautiful houses. No, it is the poor people of France. Jean Valjean is one of these poor people. He is a young man, big, strong, and a good worker. But he has no work. He cannot find work. And he is hungry. He lives with his sister in the village of Brie. Her husband is dead, and she has 7 children. It is a cold, hard winter, and there is no food in the house. No bread, nothing, and 7 children. Jean Valjean is a good man. He is not a thief. But how can a man just sit there when his sister's children cry all night because they are hungry? What can a man do? He leaves his house at night and goes down the village street. He puts his hand through the window of the bakery. Crash! He takes a loaf of bread and he runs. He runs fast, but other people run faster. France is not kind to poor people. France sends Jean Valjean to prison for 5 years. After 4 years, he escapes. They find him and bring him back. They give him 6 more years. Once again, he escapes, and 2 days later, they find him, and they give him another 8 years. 19 years in prison for a loaf of bread. In 1815, when he leaves prison, Jean Valjean is a different man. Prison changes people. Years of misery, years of back-breaking work, years of cruel prison guards. These things change a man. Once there was love in Jean Valjean's heart. Now there is only hate. One evening in October, in the year 1815, there was a knock on the door of the Bishop of Digne's house. "Come in," said the bishop. The bishop was a kind man. Everyone in the town of Digne knew that. Poor people, hungry people, miserable people, they all came to the door of the bishop's house. The bishop's sister looked at the man at the door that night, and she was afraid. "Look at him," she whispered to the bishop. "He is a big man and a dangerous one. He carries a yellow card, so he was once a prisoner, a bad man." But the bishop did not listen. "Come in, my friend," he said to the man at the door. "Come in. You must eat dinner with us and sleep in a warm bed tonight." The man stared at the bishop. "My name is Jean Valjean," he said. "I was a prisoner in Toulon for 19 years. Here is my yellow card, see? People everywhere shut their doors in my face. But not you. Why not? Because, my friend, in the eyes of God, you are my brother, said the bishop, smiling. So come in and sit by our fire. The bishop turned to his sister. Now, sister, our friend Jean Valjean needs a good dinner. Bring out the silver dinner plates. It's a special night tonight. Not the silver plates, whispered the bishop's sister. Her eyes went quickly to Jean Valjean, then back to the bishop's face. Yes, the silver plates, said the bishop, and the silver candlesticks too. The church has these beautiful things, but they are for our visitors. And our visitor tonight must have only the best. And so Jean Valjean sat down with the bishop and his sister and ate from silver plates. He ate hungrily. It was his first good meal for weeks. You're a good man, he said to the bishop. Perhaps the only good man in France. But Valjean could not take his eyes away from the silver plates. After the meal, the bishop's sister put the silver plates away, and Valjean's eyes watched. He saw the place, and he remembered it. In the night, in his warm bed in the bishop's house, he thought about the plates. They were big, heavy, so much silver in them. I can sell those plates, he thought. For just one of them, I can eat well for months. 19 years in prison is a long time, and 19 hard years change a man. By morning, Valjean was a long way from the bishop's house. But how do you carry big silver plates? How do you hide them? People in D began to whisper. Did you see him? That big man carrying 6 silver plates. Where did he get them from, eh? Those plates came from the church. A man like that doesn't have silver plates. No, and he carries a yellow card. Did you see? So he was a prisoner once. He's a thief. He stole those plates. The police heard the whispers. They went after Jean Valjean, found him, and took him back to the bishop's house in the afternoon. But there they had a surprise. My dear friend, the bishop said to Jean Valjean, I am so pleased to see you. You forgot the candlesticks. I gave you the silver plates and the candlesticks. You remember? But you forgot to take the candlesticks when you left. But this man is a thief, said one of the policemen. No, of course not, said the bishop, smiling. I gave the silver to Monsieur Valjean. You mean he can go? He is free, said the policeman. Of course, the bishop said. All this time, Jean Valjean stared at the bishop and said not one word. The policeman went away, and the Bishop of Digne went into his house and came out again with the 2 silver candlesticks. They were tall and heavy and beautiful. The bishop put the candlesticks into Jean Valjean's hands. "Jean Valjean, my brother," he said, "you must leave your bad life behind you. This is God's silver, and I am giving it to you. With it, you can begin a new good life. I am buying your soul for God." Jean Valjean left the town of Digne with his silver plates and his silver candlesticks. Suddenly, he was a rich man, but he did not understand why. "What's happening to me?" he thought. "Everything is changing. How can I hate people when this bishop is so good to me? What shall I do? How shall I live?" Prisoner Valjean did not understand anything. He sat down by the road with his head in his hands and cried. He cried for the first time in 19 years. How long did he sit there crying? What did he do next, and where did he go? Nobody knows. But when the sun came up on a new day, he was a changed man. Chapter 2. Fantine. Forward. Now we meet Fantine. She is young and beautiful, and in love with a man in Paris. But she has no family and no money. For Fantine, this is the love of her life. For the man in Paris, it is just a summer of love. Men are not kind to women. They have their fun, and then they walk away. The man in Paris goes home to his rich family and leaves poor Fantine with a child, a little girl called Cosette. Fantine must find work, but how? Fantine has a child but no husband, and a woman without a husband is nothing, worse than nothing. People are not kind to a woman with a child but no husband. They turn their faces away. They close their doors. They say, "There's no work here for a woman like you." Fantine loves her daughter dearly, but what can she do? So, in 1818, in a village near Paris, she leaves her little daughter with Monsieur and Madame Thénardier. They ask for 7 francs a month. Fantine pays the money, holds her daughter in her arms for the last time, and leaves. She takes the road for her home town of Montreuil, and tears are running down her face. There is misery in her heart. Poor Fantine. Poor Cosette. In Montreuil, Fantine finds work in a factory. This is the factory of Monsieur Madeleine, an important man in the town and very rich. Everybody likes him because he is a good man. He is kind to his workers, he helps people, and his factory gives many jobs to the townspeople. But who is he, this Monsieur Madeleine? Where did he come from? He arrived in Montreuil at the end of 1815. But nobody knows his family or anything about him. Fantine sent money every month to the Thénardiers. They were not good people, and they used the money for their own daughters. Poor little Cosette was a hungry, dirty, unloved child. She worked all day. She cleaned the house, she carried water, she washed the clothes. But Fantine knew nothing of this, and she worked long hours to make money for Cosette. The next year, the Thénardiers asked for 12 francs a month. The year after that, they wanted 15 francs. Then, Fantine lost her job at the factory because the women did not like her. "She has a child in a village somewhere near Paris." "Yes, and where's her husband?" "She doesn't have one." "We don't want that kind of woman here. She must go." Fantine found work making shirts. It was hard work for little money. She was often ill, with a small, dry cough. The Thénardiers wrote again. "Your daughter needs a warm dress for winter. Send 10 francs at once." Fantine did not have 10 francs. She thought long and hard and went to the barber in the town. She took off her hat and her golden hair fell down her back. "That's beautiful hair," said the barber. "What can you give me for it?" 10 francs. "Then cut it off." She sent the money to the Thénardiers. "My daughter's not cold now," she thought. "She's wearing my hair." Soon, another letter came from the Thénardiers. "Send 100 francs, or Cosette must leave our house." 100 francs! How can a poor woman get that kind of money? There was only one way. One cold winter evening, outside a restaurant in the centre of Montreuil, a woman walked up and down. There was snow on the ground, but the woman wore an evening dress with flowers in her hair. Some young men came out of the restaurant, saw her, and began to call her bad names. They laughed and shouted, but the woman did not look at them. Then one young man took some snow and put it down the back of the woman's dress. The woman was Fantine. She gave a cry, turned, and hit the young man's face with her hands. People came to watch, laughing. A tall policeman arrived, took the woman by the arm, and pulled her away. "Come with me," he said. This policeman was Inspector Javert. He was new to Montreuil, and he was a hard man. To him, the law was the only important thing in life, and he hated criminals. The law in France at that time was not kind to women like Fantine. Javert took Fantine to the office of police.
You hit a man in the street, and that's a crime, he told her. You're getting 6 months.
6 months in prison, Fantine cried. No! I'm not a bad woman, monsieur, please. I must work. I need the money for my little daughter. Please, please don't send me to prison. She fell to the floor, crying.
Take her away,
Javert said to a policeman. One moment, please, said a new voice. Everybody turned to look at the door, and there stood the good, the great Monsieur Madeleine. He was an important man in Montreuil. Inspector, he said, I was outside the restaurant too, and I can tell you the true story. The young man began the fight, and this poor woman, he looked at Fantine on the floor, must go free. She did nothing wrong.
The woman is a criminal,
said Javert angrily.
She
must go free, said Monsieur Madeleine. Ask the other people at the restaurant. We all saw the same thing. Fantine stood up slowly. She began to cough, a hard, dry noise. Monsieur Madeleine took her arm gently. My dear child, you are not well, he said. Javert's cold eyes stared at Monsieur Madeleine.
Do I know you from somewhere? He said. Were you ever at Toulon?
Monsieur Madeleine looked at him. His face did not change, but his eyes were suddenly very watchful. No, I don't know Toulon, he said. Monsieur Madeleine took Fantine to the little hospital in Montreuil. She lay in bed and coughed and coughed. Monsieur Madeleine listened to her sad story, and the next day he sent money to the Thénardiers. Now, you must get better, he told Fantine. Cosette needs you. But Fantine did not get better. She was now very ill, and 5 days later the doctor spoke to Monsieur Madeleine.
Does she have a child, this poor woman?
He said. Yes, a small daughter.
You must bring the child here, soon.
Monsieur Madeleine went to sit by Fantine's bed.
Monsieur Madeleine,
you are so kind to me. I want to see my daughter one last time. Please, can you bring Cosette to me? Please, monsieur. Monsieur Madeleine took her hand. Of course I can, he said gently. And then the door of the room suddenly opened behind him, and Fantine cried out, "No! No!" Monsieur Madeleine looked round quickly. Inspector Javert came into the room with 4 policemen.
Jean Valjean, prisoner at Toulon. I am arresting you,
Javert said.
After you left the prison, you stole money from a child in Toulon. You are still a thief, and now you must go to prison for life.
Fantine sat up in bed. "No!" she cried. "Cosette!" Monsieur Madeleine stood up slowly. "Inspector, give me 3 days," he said. He was a big man, much bigger than Javert. 3 days to bring this poor woman's child to her before she dies. Then you can take me. Javert laughed loudly.
3 days? You're going to run away!
Behind the 2 men, Fantine cried out, "Monsieur Madeleine, please take care of Cosette. Oh, please." Javert turned to her.
Be quiet, woman. There's no Monsieur Madeleine here. This man is a criminal called Jean Valjean, and he's going to prison.
Fantine stared at Javert and tried to speak, but she could not. She fell back in the bed and lay still. She was dead. The people of Montreuil talked about that day for a long time. The death of the woman Fantine, the arrest of Monsieur Madeleine. Javert put Monsieur Madeleine in a locked room in the police office. But in the night, he broke down the door and escaped. Where did he go? Did he go to his house in the town? His old servant said no. She saw nobody and heard nothing, she said. She loved Monsieur Madeleine very much. So where did Monsieur Madeleine go? Nobody in Montreuil saw him again. One thing was certain. In Monsieur Madeleine's house, there were 2 beautiful old silver candlesticks. The next day, they were gone. Chapter 3. Cosette. Forward. Monsieur Madeleine is, of course, Jean Valjean. You knew that already. After Digne, he sells the bishop's silver plates, but keeps the candlesticks. He comes to Montreuil, builds his factory, works hard, is kind to other people. He makes a new, good life, and is true to the Bishop of Digne. But after Valjean left prison in Toulon, and before he came to Digne, he was hungry. And in a street in Toulon, he stole some money from a boy. Just 1 franc, to buy bread. Because he did this, the law in France says that prisoner Valjean must go back to prison and stay there for life. He can never be a free man again. And so we meet Javert. Before Montreuil, he was a prison guard at Toulon. The law is his God, and he hates all criminals. He remembers Jean Valjean, that big, strong man, very well. He wants to see him in prison again. And he, Inspector Javert, is going to put him there. Jean Valjean remembers Javert now. He remembers the cold eyes, the hard voice, the cruel prison guard's smile. He remembers and is afraid. He knows that Javert is his enemy for life. But he remembers Fantine too. He remembers her dying words. "Please take care of Cosette. Please." How can he leave this little girl without a mother, without a friend in the world? He must find her, Javert or no Javert. Monsieur and Madame Thénardier lived in a village called Montfermeil near Paris. There was no water in the village, and the nearest water was a small river in a wood 15 minutes' walk away. People carried the water in buckets to their houses. Cosette hated that wood. At night, the trees made noises. She was frightened of the noises, frightened of the dark, and, with a heavy bucket of water, it was a long walk home. One dark winter night in 1823, Madame Thénardier sent Cosette out to the river for water. Cosette ran to the river, and then, with her heavy bucket of water, she began to walk home. The trees were noisy tonight, whispering and laughing at her, and the little girl began to cry. "Oh, please, God, help me! Please, dear God!" And suddenly, the bucket was gone. A great hand came down and took it from her. She looked up and saw a big man in an old yellow coat. Sometimes we know, without words, when something good is happening. The little girl knew that now, and she was not frightened of the big man, not a bit. The man spoke to her. "Child, this is a very heavy bucket. Shall I carry it for you?" "Yes, monsieur." "How old are you?" "I'm 8 years old, monsieur." "Where is your mother?" "I don't know," said the child. "I haven't got a mother." "What's your name?" "Cosette." The big man stopped. He put the bucket down and looked into Cosette's face. "Why are you carrying a heavy bucket of water at this time of night? Who sent you?" "Madame Thénardier." "I would like to talk to this Madame Thénardier. Shall we go and see her?" "Yes, monsieur." Cosette was not afraid of the tree noises now. This big man, with his gentle voice, was a new and wonderful thing in her life. They walked to the Thénardiers' house. "Please, monsieur, can I carry the bucket now?" "But why?" "I can't ask people for help, Madame says. She hits me when I do that," Cosette said. "She hits me all the time." He gave her the bucket. The Thénardiers were very surprised to see Cosette's new friend, this big man in the old yellow coat. Inside the house, the big man looked at Cosette. He saw her thin clothes, her dirty hair, her big, frightened eyes. She was small for her 8 years. Her hands were red from kitchen work, and she had no shoes. "Why does this child have no shoes on her feet on this cold winter night?" he said to Madame Thénardier. Madame Thénardier looked at Cosette angrily.
Go into the kitchen, Cosette. There is work to do. Go!
"And who are you?" Monsieur Thénardier said. "I am here for Fantine, the child's mother," said the big man. "You don't need to know my name. Fantine is dead, so you can get no more money from her. Here," he put some money on the table, "is 1,500 francs. Now call the child. I'm taking her away." When Jean Valjean and Cosette left Montfermeil, Cosette did not look back. She never wanted to see Madame Thénardier again. She put her cold little hand into Valjean's great hand and looked up into his face. "Monsieur," she said, Can I call you father?" Valjean looked down at her big round eyes. "Yes," he said. He did not know love. He did not understand love. But in that moment, suddenly, he felt a father's love for this small child. "Yes," he said again. "Yes, you can call me father. It's a good name." Hand in hand, they walked away on the road to Paris. In Paris, Cosette learnt to laugh and to sing like a bird and to be happy. Jean Valjean learned to be father and mother to this child, and he loved her dearly. But they lived quietly, moved house often, and only went out at night. Because Javert, too, was in Paris. When Valjean escaped from Montreuil, Javert came to Paris to look for him. He was now an important inspector in the Paris police. Every criminal in Paris was afraid of Inspector Javert. Once, Valjean saw Javert by the river, and the next day he looked for a new place to live. He found one, behind the high walls of a girls' school. The school gave Valjean a job as a gardener, and he lived in a little house in the big gardens. Cosette lived in the school, but every day she came to the gardener's little house for 1 hour. They talked and they sang and they read books. It was the happiest hour in the day for her and for Jean Valjean. And so the years passed. Chapter 4. Marius. Forward. 9 years pass. Valjean and Cosette are living in the Rue Plumet in Paris, in a house with a big garden. It is a quiet street, and nobody comes there. This pleases Valjean, because he is still afraid of Inspector Javert. Cosette is now a young woman. She is tall, with golden brown hair. She is beautiful, but there are many beautiful faces in the world. The wonderful thing about Cosette's face is her smile. A slow, warm, gentle smile, like sunlight after rain. And now we must meet Marius and his young friend Gavroche. Marius is a student, a young man with many ideas but no money. Paris is full of young men like this. Marius has a grandfather. His father is dead, but he does not talk to him. Their political ideas are very different. At 17, he leaves home with 30 francs, his watch, and a small bag of clothes. Now, 5 years older, he lives with other students, and they talk all night about books and ideas, politics and government, life and death. All students are like this. They live for ideas and do a little work here and there, when they need to. Gavroche is a child of the Paris streets. He is 11 or 12 years old, and wears a man's trousers and a woman's shirt. A kind woman gave these clothes to him. He lives on the streets, knows everybody, goes everywhere, and enjoys life. Well, why not? He knows no other life, only this one. Marius loved walking through the streets and gardens of Paris, and he often walked in the Luxembourg garden. One day in the garden, he saw a man with a young girl. The man was about 60, and the girl, Marius thought, was about 17. He did not see her eyes, but he saw her golden brown hair and her slow, gentle smile. He walked past them once and did not look back. But he came to the Luxembourg the next day, and the day after that, and for the next 5 days. The man and the girl were always there. He could not stop looking at the girl. He wanted very much to see that smile again. On the 7th day, the girl turned her head and looked at Marius. She looked into his eyes across the garden, and that look went like a bullet from a gun into Marius's heart. There were no words, but at once Marius knew and the girl knew. This was love. Life stopped for Marius then. He spent hours in the Luxembourg, and every time he saw her, the sun came out and all the birds in the garden began singing. But the man began to look at Marius too, and his face was not friendly. Marius was afraid, and he went to Gavroche. "Gavroche, please, you must help me." "Why? What's the matter, Monsieur Marius?" "There's a girl, Gavroche. She walks in the Luxembourg every day. I want you to follow her home and tell me the address.
Why don't you follow her? I'm busy, said Gavroche.
I'm afraid to, said Marius. Her father, grandfather, I don't know, is watching me. He doesn't like me.
Why is this important, Monsieur Marius? Gavroche said. He had a big smile on his face.
Because I'm in love, shouted Marius. Please, Gavroche, do it.
Gavroche ran away, laughing. 2 days later, he came to Marius's rooms. Rue Plumet, he said. House at the end of the street. Hard to find. You need to look for it. Spring came, and Cosette began to go out into the garden at Rue Plumet. She was usually alone. Her old servant, Toussaint, was always in the kitchen, and father, Jean Valjean, was in his room, reading. Cosette was sad. She remembered the young man in the Luxembourg garden, but father no longer wanted to go there. But that evening, in the Rue Plumet garden, something very wonderful happened. She heard a voice, a man's voice. She looked round, and it was him.
I'm so sorry,
he said.
Please, don't be afraid. I just wanted to... You remember the Luxembourg garden? I saw you there for the first time. I can't forget you. Day and night I think about you. Please, don't be afraid. You see, I love you. It just happened to me. I can't stop it. Don't be afraid. Please.
Cosette listened to this wonderful river of words, and then held out her hand to him. He took her hand, and she pulled it to her and put it against her heart.
Then you love me, he said.
Of course. You know that. A kiss. No words. They did not need words. Later, words came. The story of his life, the story of her life, everything. Between lovers, everything is interesting. When they were done with words, Cosette put her head on Marius's shoulder and asked, "What is your name?"
My name is Marius. And yours?
Cosette. Every evening they met secretly in the garden at Rue Plumet. A kiss, a gentle laugh, whispered words of love. It was the spring and summer of their young lives. But around them, outside their garden, there was change. There were angry people. There were police and soldiers on the streets of Paris. And one day, Jean Valjean said to Cosette, "My dearest child, we live in dangerous times. We must leave France and go to England." Cosette looked at him with frightened eyes. "Must we go, father?" she said. Valjean watched her face. "We must," he said. "Get ready to leave very soon."
There was a change in Cosette. Valjean remembered the young man in the Luxembourg garden, and he looked at Cosette's beautiful young face. He was afraid of losing his dear daughter. That evening in the Rue Plumet garden, there were many unhappy tears. "But you must follow us to England," cried Cosette.
"How can I do that?"
cried Marius.
"I have no money, no passport even. England to me is like the moon."
They held hands in the moonlight.
"Listen, I have an idea,"
Marius said slowly.
"Wait 2 days. Perhaps—"
2 days, cried Cosette. How can I live 2 days without you? Chapter 5. Love and Rebellion. Forward. So, what is Marius's idea? It is this. He wants to marry Cosette, but he has no money. His grandfather has money. He must ask his grandfather. But his grandfather is an old man, and old men's ideas do not change easily. He shouts at Marius. Marius shouts back, and that is the end of that. The next evening, he goes as usual to the Rue Plumet. There is nobody in the garden. The house is dark. The windows are closed. Cosette and her father are gone. Marius cannot live without Cosette. He wants to die. But Gavroche tells him that his friends need him. It is June 1832, and students and workers are running through the streets of Paris, bringing rebellion to the city, and everyone must fight the government. Marius is soon at the barricades with a gun in his hand. He is happy. Death can come at any moment with a bullet from a soldier's gun. These are dangerous times. Jean Valjean sees Inspector Javert in a street near the Rue Plumet. What is he doing there? Are the police watching his house? Valjean does not wait. The same night, he and Cosette leave Rue Plumet. They move to 7 Rue de l'Homme Armé and begin to get ready for England. How can love find a way in these troubled times? When the soldiers attacked in front of the Arsenal building, the people turned and ran, this way and that way, through the streets of the city. Marius and his friends came to the Rue de la Chanvrerie, and they built their barricade there. It was 2 meters high, made of wood and stone. Behind their barricade, the rebels waited for the soldiers. Night came, but nothing happened. Enjolras was the leader of the students. He called Gavroche to him.
"You're small," he said. "Nobody sees you. Go and have a look round the city, and then bring us any news."
Just after midnight, Gavroche was back.
"The soldiers aren't moving," he said. "But there are a lot of them."
He stopped suddenly and whispered,
Hey, who's that? That tall man over there.
Enjolras and Marius turned to look.
I don't know him,
said Marius. People are coming and going all night, said Enjolras. Why, Gavroche? Do you know him?
Yes,
whispered Gavroche.
He's not one of us. He's a spy. A police spy. Name of Javert. He stopped me once down by the river. Put me in prison all night.
Are you certain about this, Gavroche?
said Marius.
I'm certain all right, said Gavroche. He's a spy.
The rebels did not like spies. 4 of Enjolras' men jumped on Javert, pulled him into the tavern behind the barricade, and tied him to the wall.
Do we shoot him now?
asked one of the men. Later, said Enjolras. He can wait. They went back outside to the barricade and listened for the sound of soldiers. Gavroche found Marius at the far end of the barricade.
Marius,
he whispered.
On my way back here, I came past your rooms and went in.
Why? whispered Marius.
I was hungry, said Gavroche. The woman in your house is nice. She always gives me something to eat. But she had a letter for you. She gave it to me. It came 2 days ago, she said.
A letter? A letter from whom?
Suddenly, there was hope in Marius's heart.
Quick, give it to me.
The letter was from Cosette.
My dearest, Father says we must leave at once. We go tonight to 7 Rue de l'Homme Armé, and soon to England. Oh, my dear, how can I live without you? Cosette.
Marius read this letter 4 times and then kissed it. She still loved him. He must write back to her and say his last goodbye. There was still no sound of soldiers in the street. He found some paper and a pencil.
Cosette, dearest, I came to the Rue Plumet, but you were gone already. We cannot marry. I went to my grandfather, and he said no. I have no money, and you have no money. I love you. I can never forget you. The fighting begins here very soon. When I am dead, don't be sad. Our love was beautiful. Marius.
He called to Gavroche.
I want you to take this letter to the Rue de l'Homme Armé. Can you do that for me?
Yes, but not now, said Gavroche. I'm staying here for the fighting. I can shoot too, you know.
Gavroche, you're just a boy. We don't want you to die in the fighting. Stay away from the shooting. And this letter is very important to me. It must go now. I want you to put it into Cosette's hands. Please, Gavroche.
Oh, very well,
said Gavroche. He took the letter, put it inside his shirt, and ran off into the dark. When Valjean and Cosette left the house in Rue Plumet, Cosette was very sad. Valjean saw this, but he said nothing. In the Rue de l'Homme Armé, Cosette stayed in her bedroom. Toussaint took her meals up to her. In the night, Valjean could not sleep. The city was quiet, but for how long? He went outside the house and stood in the street, listening. There were voices in the next street, and then he heard singing. A boy singing. Gavroche came up the street, looking at the house numbers. He saw Valjean and stopped.
"Well, young man, what's the news?"
said Valjean.
"The news is that I'm hungry,"
said Gavroche. Valjean put his hand in his pocket and found a 5-franc piece. Gavroche stared at it. He didn't see many 5-franc pieces, and he was very pleased to see this one. He put it in his pocket.
"You're all right,"
he said.
"Do you live in this street? Do you know number 7?
"What do you want with number 7? said Valjean.
"Letter for someone,"
said Gavroche.
"A woman."
Valjean stared at him. He felt cold. A woman. Cosette? He remembered at once the young man in the Luxembourg. He tried to smile.
"Ah, that's the letter for Cosette," he said. "I'm waiting for it."
"Yes, that's her." "Well, here you are,"
said Gavroche.
"It comes from the barricade in the Rue de la Chanvrerie. I'm going back there now. Good night, monsieur."
Jean Valjean went back into the house with Marius's letter. He read it quickly. "I love you. I can never forget you." So, Cosette, his dear, dear daughter, was in love. She was his world. Without her, his life was nothing. He could not even think about it. "When I am dead, don't be sad." Those words gave him hope. So the young man was one of the rebels at the barricade.
"When the soldiers start shooting,"
he thought,
"that's the end of all the rebels. I do nothing. I say nothing. I keep this letter and poof, nothing changes in our lives." But Valjean did not feel easy. He remembered all their happy years as father and daughter, and he saw again Cosette's sad eyes when they left the Rue Plumet. How could he take her away to England? He turned and went out of the room. A little later, he left the house wearing dark clothes and carrying a gun, and walked away down the street. Chapter 6. The Barricades. Forward. It is a long night at the barricade in the Rue de la Chanvrerie. The news is bad. More and more soldiers are arriving in the city, but the people stay in their homes. This time, they don't want to fight the government. Only the students are still at the barricades, waiting for the soldiers' bullets and death. Then, a new man arrives at the barricade,
a big man in dark clothes. Marius stares. It is Cosette's father. He is certain. Is he a friend or an enemy? Who knows? Inside the tavern, Javert too waits for death. Rebels shoot spies. He knows that. Does he think about his life, waiting there in the tavern? Is the law always right? Can a criminal change and be a good man? Does Javert ask these questions? Who knows? Daylight comes, and the shooting begins. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat on the barricade, noise and shouting, cries and screams. Valjean saves Enjolras' life. 2 men die. Valjean carries the bodies into the tavern, sees Javert, and Javert sees him. Then the shooting stops. The rebels need more bullets, and Gavroche runs out to the front of the barricade. "Come back, Gavroche!" He doesn't listen and starts singing. There are dead soldiers lying in the street. Gavroche takes the bullets from their bags and puts them into his bag. He is small and quick, and his bag is nearly full before the soldiers start shooting at him. "Come back, Gavroche!" He sings louder, but the 5th bullet hits him, and he falls down in the street. He moves once, then falls back. Gavroche is dead. A child of the Paris streets, his singing now stopped forever, just another dead body in the rebellion. Smoke from the guns is everywhere. It is hard to see anything. But Marius runs out into the street, picks Gavroche up, and runs back. He puts the small body on a table in the tavern and cries. It is going to be a long day. Behind the barricade, Enjolras talked to the men. "They're going to attack again soon. 60 soldiers to every one of us. Marius and I are your 2 leaders. Gavroche brought us bullets, so let's use them well and fight to the end."
"Let's kill the spy now,"
said one of the men. Then Valjean spoke.
"Give him to me. I can do that for you. I'd like to shoot him."
Enjolras looked at him. "You saved my life, friend. You can have the spy." Valjean took Javert out of the tavern to a little street behind. He took out a knife.
"Oh, a knife," said Javert. "Of course, a criminal's way to kill. So, kill me, and be quick."
Valjean said nothing. He cut the ropes around Javert's arms and legs, then stood up and said, "You're free to go." Javert stared. He could not understand this.
"I live in the Rue de l'Homme Armé,"
Valjean said. "The next time we meet, you can arrest me. Now, go." Javert turned and walked away. Valjean fired his gun into the air, then went back to the barricade. "It's done," he told Enjolras. Now the second attack began. The government had more men more guns, more bullets, and, one by one, the students began to die. Marius was on top of the barricade. He was one of the last men still alive. But then 1, 2 bullets hit him, and he fell. 2 great hands at once picked him up.
Cosette,
whispered Marius, and then he went into that dark night. Jean Valjean knew Paris well, knew its little back streets, its secret places. He used them now. With the dead or dying Marius in his arms, he ran through the back streets, watching at every corner. Night came, and the sky was full of the smoke from the guns. Valjean stopped to rest. In Marius's pocket, he found a piece of paper.
take my body to my grandfather's house in...
The address was in the Marais, not far away. Valjean began to pick up Marius's body again, and a hand came down hard on his shoulder. Valjean turned. Javert stood behind him.
"What are you doing here?"
he said.
"Who is this man?"
Valjean stood up.
Inspector Javert,
He said,
I told you. I'm tired of running and hiding. You can arrest me. Put me back in prison. I ask just one thing. Help me to take this young man home. That is all.
"He's dead,"
said Javert.
No, not yet. He lives in the Marais with his grandfather. Look.
He showed Javert the piece of paper. Javert read the address, then called to a carriage along the street. They put Marius's body on the back seat and sat side by side on the front seat. At the house of Marius's grandfather, a servant opened the door. She gave a little scream when she saw Marius in Valjean's arms.
It's Monsieur Marius!
"Take the boy in,"
said Javert.
"I'm waiting for you. Here at the door."
His voice was different, uncertain. Valjean looked at him, then carried Marius's body into the house.
Call a doctor quickly,
he said to the servants.
He was at the barricade and has 2 bullets still in him.
Then he came back downstairs and out into the street. Javert was gone. Valjean looked up and down the street. Nothing. Nobody. Down by the river Seine, near the Place du Châtelet, Javert stood on the bridge, looking down into the water.
"What must I do?"
he thought. But for the first time in his life, he had no answer. Valjean's words at the barricade went through his head again and again.
"You're free to go.
Free to go. Free to go.
I can do one of 2 things,"
Javert said to the river.
"I can arrest him, or I can not arrest him and say you are free to go. But the law is the law, so I must arrest him. But he gave me my life, so I must give him his life. But the law is the law."
And a voice in Javert's head said, "You
worked for the law all your life, but Jean Valjean is a better man than you are.
For a long time, Javert stared down at the river, but the river gave him no answer to his question. Then he took off his hat and put it carefully on the ground. A moment later, he stood high on the bridge, then fell down into the dark river. There was a splash, and that was all. Chapter 7. Love and Death. Forward. Marius lies for a long time between life and death. But, months later, he is well again. Cosette visits him every day, and this, of course, helps him a lot. His grandfather is happy to have his grandson back, and is happy to have a new granddaughter in Cosette. The two young people marry, and live in the house of Marius's grandfather in the Marais. There is a surprise for the young people. Cosette has money. A lot of money, Valjean tells them. She has 600,000 francs. This pleases Marius's grandfather very much, but the young people are only interested in love, not in money. Where does it come from, this money? Years ago, when Valjean was Monsieur Madeleine with a factory, he was a rich man. Before he left Montreuil, he took his money and the bishop's candlesticks to a secret place. When he needs money, he goes back there. Now this money is for Cosette, and the candlesticks stand in Valjean's house in the Rue de l'Homme Armé. They look very fine, and Toussaint cleans them every day. A new life begins for everybody. But there are still secrets from the past, and Valjean wants to tell them. He feels old and tired. Death is coming for him at last, he feels. He calls Cosette and Marius to his bedside.
Listen, dearest Cosette, to the story of your mother,
he says. Cosette hears the story of Fantine's sad life. She learns that Valjean is not her real father. But in her life there is only one father, and that is Valjean, she tells him.
Come closer, my children,
he says.
I love you dearly, and I die happy. Come closer and take my hands.
Cosette and Marius are by his bed, holding his hands and crying. His great hands are still and do not move again. He lies with his head turned up to the sky, and the light from the bishop's candlesticks falls upon his face.